I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly. I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram is a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name is Jeff Cook. I'm a longtime professor of philosophy in Greeley, Colorado. With me is TJ Wilson, coffee guru, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
My man.
Hey.
It is cold outside and both of us are wearing hats.
Cold, and it's so windy. Technically mine is a bandana.
Yeah.
But yes. Yeah.
I'm bundled up. It was negative 13 here recently.
That's true.
And
that wind is nasty.
No good reason. You know what people want to hear is about the weather. No,
right.
The real reason that they clicked on this is because we have a guest. Jackie Contessa is with us. Jackie is fantastic. Jackie is a content creator and Enneagram coach, goes by the moniker Table for Nine, and is doing super impressive work in New Jersey. But it's not just New Jersey, it's East New Jersey. Is that what I caught?
It's like North Jersey. It's very specific.
North Jersey.
We're specific about it, yeah.
Because apparently you don't want to get lumped in with those other folks.
Central Jersey doesn't really exist, so. Yeah.
This is fair.
North and south, that's it.
Yeah.
Apologies to all you in Central Jersey, but there
is no Central Jersey.
Is there not? I mean, it's just a sliver. I suppose that's true.
We just don't like them.
Well, what we've been doing here recently, many of you know this, is we've been going through our 10 questions with the most informed people that we know. Jackie, despite the moniker helper for Enneagram 2s, I got a lot of people who said no to me who are my good friends. And perhaps that's because they're healthy 2s. They know to say no to me. But because I'm going to use up their entire afternoon with our dumb podcast. But you have not yet realized that we're going to be keeping you prisoner for the next 3 hours and talking all about you. So welcome.
Thank you so much. As long as I get a potty break, I think I'm okay. I'm a listener of the podcast, so I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Jackie's a 2. Jackie, when you think about 2-ness, we can just jump right in. What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
When I first realized that I was a 2, to be honest, I was really surprised to hear that people would like manipulate online tests and those scores and things like that to try to score as a 2, because I was like, this is the most terrifying description of a person I've ever heard. So I was like a little bit thrown by that, but I hate that the word helpful comes to mind when I think of a 2, but I mostly think of a giver. I try to use giver for type 2 because number one, they're not always helpful. We're not always helpful. We want to be.
You often think you're being helpful.
100%.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that that's, manipulation is not always about intention, but we'll get there at a different time. So I think this idea is about this idea of being a helper is not always fitting, but the idea of giving of ourselves is always going to be the case. So that's the first thing that I think of, to be honest, when I think of being an Enneagram 2 is taking pieces of yourself and giving them, taking pieces of yourself and giving them constantly.
I love that as like the sort of entryway into understanding 2-ness, because it's not a regular generosity. It's a level of self-sacrifice that is intuitive in a way that a lot of the rest of us don't really understand.
Well, it only becomes generosity at a point. I mean,
right.
It only becomes generosity as a point. It doesn't matter how much time you spent there, how often you've rolled up your sleeves, how much money and time and seeds you've paid. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It only becomes generosity when you don't have an agenda, unfortunately. Yeah. So, yeah.
Love that.
I assume there's a motive underneath all this for taking pieces of yourself and giving. What is it that you think you're going to get out of just giving yourself in these ways?
It's so hard for me to say that I can speak for twos, so I'm just going to speak for myself.
Being a two, I find it hard to speak for other twos. This. By the way, we talked off air about you thinking you might be another type. Nope.
No.
There you go.
No.
You nailed it right there.
No. As soon as I always think I'm a different type, I just start bursting into tears, and I'm like, oh no, yeah, she's for sure too. I think the thing that I want the most is something that it feels funny coming off the tongue because it doesn't feel true, but it is. And it's the need to be needed by other people, because being needed doesn't feel in that way like a responsibility or more obligations. It feels like everything's going to be okay, right? Mm. Being needed by other people feels like everything's going to be okay. And so a lot of twos will struggle to say that they need to be needed, but it shows up in the fact that we struggle to know who we are and what we're here for outside of our relationships. It shows up as getting uncomfortable, taking up space if you haven't contributed something, or you're not going to contribute something, or you didn't do something at large in the big picture. I mean, the need to be needed shows up in very, very sneaky ways, but that's what we need, because that's what says you belong here and you're loved here. And we don't just love you, but we like you and we want you here.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
It's so sneaky, because the need to be needed also feels very desperate for twos. Because we also want to be wanted. So the need to be needed is very sneaky. And, that's pride for you, but that's later, right?
Is there something different in your mind between being needed and being wanted?
Yeah. Now that I've done what feels like identifiable and crack my ribs open type of work, yes. Before, no. I don't think I would have been able to say that anything that, being wanted by anybody was being loved, that being needed was being wanted. And you just start juggling all of those and any combination of those, and you're just trying to exist in a place where you can be yourself, but you're not really trained to be yourself. So initially there's no difference. Now I'm like, I don't need to be needed to know that I'm loved. I don't need to be needed to know that people want me. And to be honest, more often than not, considering whether or not I'm tolerated doesn't always come up. And I think it's because now I know that there's a difference between, being needed and being wanted. Like, I've lived and exited and been exiled out of the relationships that I set up to need me. It's been the greatest, most brutal gift, but I mean, now I'm where I'm wanted.
Yeah. That's I feel like the distinction there is such a great truth about two-ness, and comes from a place of really, you have clearly done a lot of work to at least understand this about yourself and understand this about who you are and how you navigate, because twos in that sort of central place, that desire is to be wanted for who you are, but then you learn how to be needed, and twos trick themselves into thinking that they're the same thing. And the difference is you're needed for the stuff that you do for other people. You're wanted for who you are. And that's what you really want, is to be wanted.
Right. Without the cost of, it's always possible that people reject you. And that's relative. Rejection is very, very relative. And to some, it doesn't exist. And that's fine. Right. But I think that there is this, I do want to be wanted as myself, but I'll work my way up to the safety of being able to show you who I really am. And that bar just moves. That bar just moves, sure. So it's so funny, because you want to be witnessed without being perceived at the same time. Like it's very weird. And I don't know if that's me personally. And I'm a believer that wings don't matter the way that people think that they do, but I do have a 3-wing. And so I'm like, okay, maybe that's where that comes from. But
I love that.
I'm sitting here thinking the first 5 minutes here is just gold. I've never heard any of this, and all of it pings true. So I've never heard the distinction between love, needed, and wanted. And when you say it, I'm like, of course that's a thing. And well done. Being the witnessed without being perceived. Talk about that. What does it look like?
There's I think an inner tension that happens in a 2 where they start to notice that they're being seen because it starts to feel like they're being loved, but there's a panic that starts to creep up if they've been too much them. And not helpful enough or not giving enough or and there's something that's always keeping score, and if not for that other person, but like for themselves, like what they've given. And so I think there's thinking to the heart center, being, you know, a heart center type and being image and identity are just like a hair away from each other, right? So I think this idea that this person can see me enough to love me, and like I'll speak for myself when I say as a 2, I'm like, the tension feels like I'm almost there. I'm almost there where I can be myself. I'm almost there where I can like show myself. Or I'm almost there where I can stop being as helpful, or I can stop giving as much, where they're going to understand that I'm a human and I have limits. Because that's something that 2s think, is that they have to work their way up to a certain level in a relationship with someone where they've seen each other enough where they're like, no, they know I operate on a human level. We just get each other. We just know how to meet each other's needs. And like sometimes that happens, but more often than not, that doesn't. So I think even though I've rambled quite a bit, there's this wanting to be witnessed, to be seen in some way, but like to also like not really be fully understood, but somehow be loved as ourselves. I think a large part of it too is like we will, and maybe this is part of being, you know, I know there's different names for it, but being an optimistic type or whatever is we'll manipulate ourselves a little bit too. And so sometimes being perceived doesn't quite match the image we want to be liked a lot or loved for. And that's really scary. And so I find that a lot of 2s, especially 2s who are helpers, they put a lot of distance between them and actually being like known and loved with tasks and help and things like that.
This whole like this idea of being witnessed versus perceived, we're going to come back to this when we get to the spot about relationists, because this is part of our language about it, is that like expecting rejection, you don't want to offer all of yourself. You want to offer something that you think people will receive,
and that's it.
Yeah.
It's funny because later, and I know we will get into this, but at some point, what was the question that you guys ask? How do I connect with others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wrote all in and half out.
Oh, I love that.
It's all that is. There's I don't know where I end and where you begin, but the second I can sense that you reject me, like it's like the 2-door slam, Enneagram 2-door slam. The door closes and closes. I'm expecting it to close. It's closing. It's closing. It's closing. It's closing. It's closing. Once that baby clicks shut, I've already ran.
Sure.
So anyway, that's
love that.
I don't remember how we got here. Here we are.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're describing well priorities for yourself as a 2 in the world, and a lot of what I'm hearing is that there's a heavy relational dynamic and a heavy, I suppose, understanding of what you're offering, which I think is a great entry point here. One last thing for the intro to 2s. Common in our culture is that a lot of specifically females think that they are 2s, but then are guided elsewhere. And like, when you see that taking place in others, because you've done a lot of work helping other people find their type, what goes through your mind and heart when somebody says, "Oh, I'm a 2," and you're probably recognized, "No, you're not a 2," and you know what I mean?
I like to ask a lot of questions that are like really simple in nature and just listen. So I think a lot of questions are like, what about the 2 did you relate to, besides if I took all the titles away, helper, giver, what fits? Yeah. What fits really, really well? Like if I said, describe yourself and you didn't know about the Enneagram, and things like that. And then I pick one and I go into it and I try to find something like, I know that there's different names for this, but like stances, styles, the different triads, centers of intelligence, things like that. I try to place them. Like if I can start with one point, I can ask enough questions to get to another. But really, I think that one of the biggest things is going through, I'll call them like table legs, but it's like, okay, against or across all 3 subtypes based on the archetype, right? What are personality patterns that exist and persist as a from a root cause, from this big core, from this big fat why. And we start looking at those things that come from this big why as opposed to these behaviors. And we look at them parallel to a type 2 for your example. And so I find like most women especially who come from different communities, churches, Christian communities, things like that, lean towards being what I find a 2 or a 6. It's always like, I'm 2, I'm 6, I'm 2, I'm 6. And I think looking at the motive that doesn't necessarily empower you, but honestly embarrasses you quite a bit, makes you red in the face, makes you go, how did they know this about me? That's not true. That's not true. I think that's because, like, I'm going to be completely honest. And like I may have said earlier, I was surprised to hear that some people would like manipulate answers on tests or scores and things like that to try to score us too. And I'm like, we're not all Martha's, babe. We're manipulative. Like, you don't want to be us. You don't want to be us if you're not. It's tough out here. So I think getting to a place where a person can allow themselves to be very, very, very honest about not just how they're doing their why, but why they're doing their why it matters, and what the bottom line is, and where they're coming from. Because I mean, if you see me too, and you see how I share this publicly, like I was diagnosed with PTSD, and for me that changed my life, but it also explained why I quote unquote think like a 6. It explained why I got 8 in my back pocket like a ninja star, and I'm going to throw it. Like, yeah, sure. It explains why I am quicker to stand my ground, for example. Like, it explains different things like that, right? But my motives are still the same. I'm terrified that something in me is not lovable, and I'm working on it, and I'll be working on it till I die, and it'll come and rear its ugly head at me in 10 years in a different way. But that, getting to the big fat why, I don't like this like general rhetoric around all of the types. Like, I think most of the comments that I'm fielding on the content is like, I don't identify with this as a 6, and I'm like, you know what? Word.
Yeah.
Word.
Yep.
Yes.
Lots of people don't.
Word.
Yeah.
Eat the fish and spit out the bones. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So in the history of our podcast, only 2 people have explicitly rejected the monikers. You're the idealist, the helper, etc. And both of them are 2s. And so I don't know if that's a thing, but as you were saying it, I don't know if there's something in wanting to be known or the image put forth that the preference for the numbers or the preference for other descriptions hit you as valuable. But is anything worth saying there?
For type 2 specifically?
I don't know.
And even
it's kind of an open question.
Yeah, an Enneagram studier and counselor, like why do you reject
certain names?
The names. Yeah.
I don't necessarily reject them. I find that some of the names can apply to, let's say, all subtypes, wings, finding themselves. Because I think some of those, sometimes the semantics matter and sometimes they don't. I think the semantics always matter. But I think that what I like to do is to create, at least online, like I guess a sort of I can see myself here. I actually got into a fight with somebody one time online, and I was like, yes, engagement, where I referred to type 4 as tortured artists, and people who are not type 4 started ripping me apart, and the 4s were like, thank you. And I was like, there it is. So yeah. I don't necessarily reject any names. In fact, I've heard, like people refer to both 8 and 6 as contrarian. I think what I try to do is I try to find the blanket term that applies to any way that you slice this archetype based on their core motive. And when I'm working with a person, we go through the plethora of, okay, the enthusiast, the adventurer, the epic, we go through like what feels like it describes your version of why, and help people own it. So sometimes people go loyalist for sure. Ooh, no, I am a guardian for the rules. I am a guardian of my people in that way. Okay, I'm 6 the guardian. Like, I think it really just depends on the person. So I can't think of one off the top that I reject, but if I do, I'll tell you.
The thing that I'm hearing is that there is a sense of setting the table for everyone to be able to sit down, the table for all 9 types, if you will. The sense that it's not necessarily a rejection of those things, but it's needing to maintain an openness so that these don't become hurdles for anyone else.
Yes, I think there's I mean, you know, you have to own your own seat at the table. And I think that comes from, you know, making something like eating the fish and spitting out the bones. Like, I don't, I think I get a lot of emails from people when they respond to, like, you know, newsletters and things like that. And they're like, I struggle with this fact of being this type. And I'm like, okay, so it's not you? Okay.
Right.
Like, we can admit and agree that this is available to us, that this is a place where someone like us could go under XYZ circumstances. It doesn't have to be you. And so I think being able to say, hey, like, if I care about having, I like to refer to the types by their number. It's just type 1, type 2, because I just feel like it's just easier across the board.
Yep.
If you like to identify with a name, create understanding, help other people see you in a certain way that's a little bit more, I mean, hey, like, if the shoe fits, you know, and if
that's for you, use it. Yeah.
And if it doesn't, okay, find a different shoe. It'll fit.
Yeah.
That's okay. You know?
Love it.
Yeah.
I heard 2 big things. The first was the most important, in which you said the semantics always matter. And we can just kind of sit there for a while.
It's 2 against 1. You're on the right team this time, Jeff.
The other thing that I hear is, and I think this is really helpful in understanding how 2s are in the world, is the ability to identify the emotions of others and how they are relating to the material, which I thoroughly lack. In presenting Enneagram to others, I think in real time being able to read how they emotionally are taking in it and responding to it, specifically as it comes to, like, negative uses of the Enneagram. The person is feeling like they're in a box. I imagine that's immediately, okay, I need to pivot off of this for you. Whereas I'm gonna present theory, and this is how this works. And I hope that you can tag along for long enough for me to get out my presentation. But I imagine that would be a superpower for sure as a teacher of the material, or someone who's leading others in that space. I feel like we hit the first, so we're going to go through our 10 questions. The first of our questions is what do I want most? And a lot of that has kind of come into the discussion so far of the language of being loved, being needed, being wanted, except for it's more kaleidoscopic as I was hearing it. I imagine you do want to be loved and you want to be needed, but you can make the distinction between the two, as was said. Is one of these most core to you in your 2ness? Wanted, needed, loved? Or something else?
I think core needed. It feels like a guarantee. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, it always, being needed always feels like a guarantee. Even if I know somebody doesn't like me, doesn't love me, is a sworn enemy, if I can come through for them in that moment, I know I can guarantee in that moment that they... and it was me. So being needed for sure, especially if I'm unchecked, right? Like, I have to be really, like, the one thing that I try to work really hard on is balancing all 3 intelligence centers and trying to be very, very mindful and mindful of that and stuff. So I have to be really, really careful that what I'm going for is, you know, taking action for a sense of justice and not just jumping into something because I need to be needed. So, like, that need to be needed is so core that sometimes, like, I think the same way that people talk about 3 being mostly, their deceit is mostly towards self, 2 is also not mostly, but also manipulate towards self as well. We call it reframing because it's nice, but it's manipulating. It's trying to change the outcome and things like that. So, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Last thoughts on motive there, Teach?
I mean, just the drawing attention to the fact that it's relational in nature, like that core thing, that it's different for head types. It's different for body types. The core thing there is relational in nature.
100%. I'm going to say, you know how like I hear a lot of women who are like, you know, they've recently given birth and they're like, why didn't other moms tell me about this? I don't know why other twos didn't tell me that getting married would be an identity crisis to some degree. Because here's the thing, you think you can do all of the work, right? But then you enter willingly a commitment, right? Where you are one, but you're also one made up of two individuals, and those two individual parts need to be healthy and individual. And then you see you see your self-worth through relationships in a different way, and you've got more work to do and undo. And so it's all of it is relational. Like I am a coach, and by my word and my deed, I can get people from here to there. You bet your sweet ass. But I'm going to be completely honest. I think there are a lot of times where I'm still learning who I am and what I have to give outside of other people. My job is to love other people professionally. What the heck? Who am I? Help. You know what I mean? So that's kind of
do to myself.
Yeah, literally. But I always knew, I wanted to do this. I always knew, right? So it is my job then, my job to learn who I am and why I exist outside of other people, because that is the reason I exist. And from that, I can do what I do. But it all is relational. The need to be needed, the need to be loved. It's all relational. For better or for worse, we'll base our self-worth off of it. And depending on our health, we'll get to, you know, it's funny. I talk a lot about how like the things that we struggle with, our emotional struggle and our center of intelligence is really just supposed to be a compass, and we're just misusing it, right? So like anger is supposed to be a compass. And so shame is supposed to honestly be a compass, and we have to work to unhear everything else that shame has to say, other than, hey, Nino, something is like not right. Something is not right, right? So I think we have the opportunity to check ourselves relationally if we take it, because we're never going to stop seeing the world relationally as twos. But we don't want to go into this weird place where we have to manipulate people and situations, even if we mean well, quote unquote, because our self-worth is based off of someone else.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about security moves, but oftentimes when hearing twos, that's what I hear when individualism comes up, or not individualism, but a desire to understand one's self as a two. It always feels to me like that you can get there, but it has to come through a secure move in that ability to look at yourself. I associate that with force space for the two. Am I right that when you're able to do that, that is normally when you're in a secure space?
Yeah, and I do think that a secure space is going to be very, very relative for a two, and there's going to have to be a lot of. I don't think that one thing that I will say to twos who can go to the deep place but don't, are kind of like, I don't want to do it for me though, is that like going to a healthy place is not always comfortable, and it's more often than not very, very uncomfortable, like stretching. It's great for next week. Right now, it feels like crap. So, so I think yes, I think there's a little discomfort that has to be pushed into that. But yes, like I think 2s, 7s, and 9s make some of the best future stoics. You know what I mean? So I think it's just really about being able to be uncomfortable with a healthy place, and then being able to get there, and being able from there to decide and decipher what is a fact of life. And you don't get your self-worth from facts of life. You just don't.
Yeah. Well, we've introduced the two next questions, which is how do I see the world and what's my biggest obstacle in terms of heart types, twos being one of them, are taking in the world through an emotional filter. This has a strong relational component to it, and tied to that is often this underlying feeling of shame. Some have been, I want to pivot to that real quick. Some have been elevating the word sadness instead recently. That doesn't ping for me, but I'm not a heart type. So when thinking of relationships broken or not functioning well, or you not being able to get your motive fulfilled and feel needed in the relationships that matter to you most, would you describe the feeling, the uncontrollable feeling that comes up more as sadness or more as like a self-critical, not self-critical, was shame necessarily self-critical?
So I don't say it's in the eyes of the beholder, I guess. So shame can be self-critical. I like to make the distinction between like shame and guilt, as in like shame is usually guilt is usually tied to like a responsibility, and shame is usually tied to like who you were supposed to be, what you were your identity, and things like that. Yeah. I personally don't. I don't think that sadness works for me, because I do think it's a byproduct, and I think it's very, very valid. But it doesn't work for me because it's not the compass. It's just not. So I think if I talk about, I don't want to talk about gut types. That scares me. I'll talk about head types, and we talk about, let's say anxiety, for example, right? Anxiety or fear, which are very, very different things. But anxiety is actually a tool and a compass, and it is up to the beholder to unlearn the rest of what anxiety has to say, like outside of the compass side of anxiety, right? That is the work. So the reason I don't think that sadness works for me in this case is because sadness is a byproduct feeling, and it doesn't really quite hit like a compass. Shame does, though. Shame says you're not supposed to be here. This isn't right for you. This isn't who you are. Something's not right. That's what shame tells me. And it's my job to make sure I stop it in its tracks when it says, and you're a stupid idiot. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, no. Okay, you've gone too far. You had the floor for too long. But that first, it's like an alarm bell. That first pang of shame, it's my job to take that and nurture it and do something with it. Where sadness is something is not right and you need to pause. Like, you need to pause. You need to do something with that. I think one's a root and one's a fruit. I think sadness is a bit of that fruit. And if we're being completely honest, sadness is found in all three of those centers. Whether or not pay attention to them is a different thing entirely, but sadness is found in all of those centers.
I relate to this, and I think it works better theory-wise, that the underlying feelings for all the type are signaling some sort of need, and they are rising as a protective emotion at some levels. And it's not just I feel like sadness is more of a byproduct, as you were kind of saying. Whereas I feel like shame is motivating. I think anger is motivating. I think fear is motivating, and they tie more to what's taking place in your center.
Well, and you have given a distinction between the way that guilt is about something that happened or was supposed to happen, and shame is more about who you are, who you were supposed to be. And I think that, like, in this cultural moment where we're talking about shame a lot, it's harder to make that distinction when you're talking about, like, the problem of shame as a sort of systemic issue, and getting into, like, so this is an entirely different podcast, but, like, thinking about women who carry shame because they have bodies, I don't think that it, like, shame may not be the exact right word there, because
that's what I was going to say.
Having a body is a responsibility, and the shame that's being, the quote-unquote shame being put onto them is that they are supposed to be doing something with their body. And then that becomes the shame of I am supposed to be or I'm not supposed to be. So again, it's a different podcast, but that is, I think the difference there that you have identified is really important when we're talking about shame.
For sure. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think it's, the same way Google became a verb and envy became jealousy, mm-hmm. Shame became something that you do to somebody else when you're mean to them, instead right. of either a feeling that you use or misuse. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, the semantics always matter, and sometimes they lose their meaning, and that's why we have to say, guilt and shame are not the same thing.
Right.
I
Right.
want to circle back to the motivating side of underlying feelings, because I suppose this is how I read a lot of the activities of the heart types, specifically 2s and 3s, that the earning posture of the 2 or the assertive style of the 3 in terms of overcoming some sense of past rejection is I suppose what I see elevated in the hearts. Not that like everybody, as you've rightly said, everybody will have different experiences in their past that end up having motivating power. But I suppose the cookie cutter stereotype for the 2s in my mind is that there is an awareness of past relational difficulties or separations that creates an energy that kind of propels action now. I need to do something for somebody now so that doesn't happen again. Am I wrong in thinking of it in those terms? Does that resonate with you?
It resonates very, very much. I think if I understand correctly, if you're referring to wanting to like repair things immediately and because of the relational aspect and things like that. Yeah. So it's one of those things where for people who don't even, sometimes don't even know what they need, if they know, they're not going to say it because it's embarrassing. Like conflict feels like something, like feels like I'm going to lose everything. And I know that's something that 9s can feel really similarly, especially when they feel strongly about connection. But my entire self-worth is going down with it. So there's also too conflict kind of scares me in the sense that especially if I don't really know a person and I don't know how they feel about me entirely, I'm not sure I've won them over, if I'm being honest, right? There's like a fear that what I want and what I need and is going to come up. And they're going to align that with who I am. And they're going to go, she's not worthy of that. Right? And so conflict, it provides this weird, yucky tension of if you're going to reject me, do it right now, get it over with. Because I got to know right now. I got to know right now. Yeah.
When I wonder, like, how does your past experience inform how you respond to conflict now? Like shame is a past emotion, right? It draws on those experiences, and I think that there are a lot of 2s that just aren't aware of how they've internalized that. And you've done a lot of work. I'm assuming you've done at least some of that work, and I'm just curious, like, does that your past actually inform that expression?
So I find this to be interesting because I have post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it's funny where, you're fighting with your heart, but against your body a little bit. So I find that to be, it's a very funny place for me. Like even talking with you guys and being asked questions, like my hands are sweating like you wouldn't believe. Like, it's the funniest thing. But what I will say is I was like your typical, like the way I would handle things in the past is I would typically just repress, push down. And then suddenly, I was also the scapegoat of my family. You push it enough and it explodes, right? And you know how that goes, right? So I think, to be honest, the way that I've always handled my conflicts was by not handling them and then screaming so loud that I didn't care if anyone liked me. I didn't care if anyone loved me. I wanted it to go away because I was like, I'm already rejected by this thing. Like, so what's interesting now is the first thing that has to go through my head in a conflict is, number one, you're not about to lose everything, because if you're going to say that, you have to sit here and define what everything is. And if you can, you'll survive without it, right? If you can define it. But once that's done being the forefront of my mind is the 2s are going to hate me, but you really have to find a middle and respect the other person. Like I'll never forget my first conflict with a roommate, and we were not a good fit for sure. But I remember screaming after something had come to a head, and I was just like, why are you trying to leave? Like, we have to work this out now. And she was like, what are you talking about? And where I was wrong and flat out wrong was I didn't respect the time that she needed. That conversation was already manipulated. Boom. Sure. Boom. Boom. So I think if you really want to be able to bring your everything to a conversation as a 2, even if that means that you're going to have to expose yourself by being a human and having needs and having wants and having to say them out loud because people are not mind readers. My husband and I have this rule that we say where we kind of say if we say the small stuff, we'll have very few big things to say. And that can be really difficult for a 2 to do and really difficult for a 7 to hear, right? But the repression is just not there, and conflict is handled very, very, very differently because, number one, conflict, and I've heard this, and I don't remember where I heard this from, but you can Google it, I'm sure. Conflict is the test by which people understand how much they mean to each other. So I tell myself, if I respect the process, if I respect my feelings in the beforehand, if I can really do this well and see this through really, really well, I'm going to get my answers for sure. They're going to be undoubtable, no matter what they are. And I might learn what I don't like. I might learn I don't mean XYZ to this person or to that person or whatever. The beauty of that is that I get to go put my energy where I do matter, and I can deal and survive with heartbreak. But I think there's this, I don't know, there's this, when you steward, I'm using that word, trying to use that word selectively, but like if you steward the entire process of conflict well, which is everything leading up to the actual conflict itself, right? You do get the answers you're looking for. It does benefit you, right? It's not scary. So I don't know. I think seeing it from a relational aspect and, I guess deciding what things are up to my emotions and my feelings and what things can I survive if they're facts of life. I hope that answers your questions. I rambled a little bit there.
Totally fine. Yeah.
Another side note for 2s is 2s use quotes more than anyone else that I encounter. And I find this wonderful in that it feels as though many of the 2s who are the most thoughtful about their own inner life have internalized some lessons through others. And a lot of these, I take it on the negative. I take it as kind of outsourcing their thinking and dealing with their thinking repression to bring in mantras. But on the positive, I think that's ridiculously healthy. It's like here are the things that actually matter and need to guide me in my emotional reactions to the world around me. Do you have any thoughts on that? Those, again, side note.
And also with a sort of emphasis on this isn't mine, I got this from somebody else. Like there's a relational component to where this wisdom came from.
My friend Billy Shakespeare once said.
I, first of all, as a person who doesn't have a single line to logic, yes, I need other people's wisdom and brains, and I need to credit them for it, or else I feel like I'm a terrible person. But I do. It's funny because I felt like you just like came into my house and read my mail. I'm like, how do you know about the quotes? How does he know about the quotes? How does he know? There is, and I can tell you where, for me as a personal user of quotes and a 2, quotes are the like where I pass the torch and I say, can you say this for me? Because for me, I think that, it's even as a person who, like I said, like has worked to balance all of my intelligence centers as best I can, I'm still all heart. It's still coming from here. So I can sit here and tell you the logic behind everything, but it's going to come out with feeling. It's going to come out with, I'm going to cry. It's going to happen. We're going to have to deal with it. And I think that what people do, even if 2s get to this level where they're very, very, very self-aware, is they cannot see past the emotion. They can't see past the crying, and they assume emoting means no logic is behind it, or that it's emotionally driven only with no stop, no think, no nothing. So I think when I find a quote in a movie and I say, I said, or if I say like, if I'm complaining about a friend who's taking up space from me, I'm making this up, and I say, constantly talking is not necessarily communicating. Someone's like, that's so mean. Why would you say that about a friend? That's so mean. And then if I said, they're like, oh, well, how do you feel about what Susie's doing to you? And I said, there's this quote from Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind where he says, constantly talking is not necessarily communicating. And I feel, and they go, you know what, when you put it like that, and then suddenly you're not being dramatic, your emotions are not over the top, and suddenly like people can hear you. So I find that like when I was, and I still do this. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying this. This will be the first time I've ever admitted this. Sometimes if I want to say something and I want somebody to take me seriously and I'm under the impression that they won't, or that because maybe they see me as emotional or something like that, like I'm making this decision for them for sure. But I'll say like, oh, I read somewhere, I saw a TikTok and someone said, or da-da-da-da, and then say an opinion I have or something that I think, or because
Sure.
I feel like other people will take it more seriously if they know that someone who they don't deem as emotional or emotionally driven, like, so that's my relationship with quotes. Mm-hmm. Everyone's gonna have a different relationship, but that's honestly, and it literally feels like as soon as you're talking about like twos and quotes and expressing themselves through quotes and things like that, I just immediately had this picture of me just passing a torch, like, which, and that's what I do. I hide behind other people's, the way, what it is that if something is written and out there, that means other people have already accepted the way that this person has said it. I'll take it.
This easily sounds like a criticism, and it is absolutely not a criticism. There's so much in your response to that.
Speaking of prefaces to hard comments,
just you recognize it, but like there's a sense of sort of like it's not me offering this thing, so if you reject it, you're not rejecting me.
I didn't say that, but now thanks. Well, no, but it's true.
Great.
When
Yeah.
you say it, it's like those key beliefs where if someone come up to you and was like, "You believe you'll die if you get stuck in emotional pain," you're like, "No, I won't." Like, but in reality, it's like, "Well, why are you operating?" Yes, when you say it like that, I'm like, "Well, yeah, I don't like it."
So
It's true.
I took it in a much more positive way. It's
He's
like,
like, I'm better
you know
than
what?
everyone.
Richard Pryor said this. They didn't reject Richard Pryor. And so if I floated in this way,
Yep.
actually what I heard there was a large degree of emotional intelligence and respect for your ability to influence the emotions of others through what you are saying and taking that into account. Mm-hmm. And that you are aware of your strength. And at the same time, and we'll get to this at some point, there's that underlying expectation of rejection and not wanting to break your relationships up. We can look at our past thing on shame.
And also trying to remove hurdles towards someone else hearing something good.
I appreciate that you use the word influence and not manipulate. Thank you.
I thought it a few minutes ago. I was like, no.
I was getting sushi with a friend who types as a 2, and we were kind of like not sure 2 or 9, right? And so we were discussing and talking, and we were talking, and then the conversation comes up about like, do you know what other people need? And she's like, well, I'm pretty sure. Like, I'm like, do you think a lot about getting people to like you? And she's like, yeah, but I know what they need. And I was like, what's crazy when I learned that that's called manipulation. And she was like, shut up. Like, it is such a fugly word. Like, we don't like it. I'm like, why are you guys trying to manipulate your scores to try to be mean? Like, it's so terrible. Anyway, but yes, thank you for using the word influence. And I think it's like, I think as a 2, it's not quite the same as it is for a 3, right? But there is, if there's an image, there's an attempt at a sale, right? So it's not that different from a brand. So there is a little bit of like trying to sell yourself in a way, trying to convince other people to accept you, to love you, right? And so there's a little bit of that persistence there. And depending on, things like subtype or just even who you are outside of your type and whatever environments, things like that, like, there can be like a little bit more of a need to like be heard, be seen, be understood, even if I can't say my needs out loud directly. And so I think like 2s will try to get there in any way possible, especially if it doesn't involve being rejected directly. If someone's like, you're stupid for posting that quote, it's like, you don't appreciate good movie. Your taste in movies is dumb. You're the wrong one, not me.
This makes me think of there's an episode of my favorite TV show, Community, where one of the characters is trying to say true things to other people and nobody listens to her because she's kind of a train wreck of a person, and she accidentally gets mustard on her face, and they start listening to her, and they say something along the lines of that the mustard distracts from your inherent severity. Like it's a hilarious moment, but like it's this thing where like nobody will listen to her unless she puts mustard on her face, because she's so intense and like very much like prescribing how people are supposed to be, so no one listens to her, and then she puts mustard on her face, and it's like, oh, you're saying some pretty wise things here. It's great.
That's actually wonderful. I should probably go to my early holding environments with mustard on my face.
As another footnote, it seems to me that manipulation isn't owned by twos, correct? This would, like the heart triad, they all do just fine in this space, yeah? In terms of using
heart triad.
Oh, every single human being on this earth.
Maybe it would be worth naming how manipulation works in the heart triad if we're focusing on two-ness and some of the tools that can be employed. One of the things that I think is always really interesting is I think 2s, 3s, and 4s know that they're using that tool when they use that tool. It's maybe some 3s don't, but I think that's
some
valuable.
2s don't. I think some 2s don't.
Talk about that.
I like when I say I had like literally no self-awareness as a 2 before the Enneagram. Like when I was reading everything according to my type, I knew it was true because something in me, I think the shame compass was like, oh my God, this is the final boss of your, like, this is it. But in reality, it was the first time I mean, because like if we're really honest with ourselves, most of us are hiding this stuff from ourselves. We just think that this is all a matter of survival or love, or, you know, all is fair in love and war, and this is how life works or whatever. So I don't necessarily think that 2s understand that what they are doing is manipulating. I think that there is this is how the world works, and this is how I survive, and this is how I get what I need, which is love, which is this feeling. So I think like there's not always, and again, you know, I don't think, maybe we are aware. Maybe we are. But I will say the first time I read, I think the language around manipulation, it was a shell shock to learn that what I thought was pivoting, trying more, trying harder, doing my best to feel loved, lots and lots of effort, was actually manipulated. Like that was a shock to my system, because it was a shock to my intentions too. I was like, well, I don't want to manipulate any, you know, you have this like language of like what manipulation is in our heads. So I guess now that I know what manipulation is, I'm aware when I'm doing it. But before I was like had no clue.
What's your Enneagram story, Jackie?
Oh,
like how'd you come to the material?
I had somebody bring it up to me many, many years ago. And I was like, you know, what's funny is like I had read it wrong, and she had just brought up the word to me, and I thought it was like anagrams, and I was like, oh, like bananagrams. Like I just kind of wasn't sure what it was, and I was like, you know, like I'll take any 10-minute type of quiz online, and so, you know, I would, you know, I took the quizzes. I'm like a certified test hater. I'm sure there are some great ones. Why don't you pay that person for their service instead? Anyway, so that's just my thought on tests. But I took some tests, and like I was like, are any of these like actually me? Because the results that were coming up were products of having undiagnosed PTSD and a lack of self-awareness. And so started really looking into it and doing study and researching. And I honestly don't remember what it was that I saw, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was something related to this idea that 2s like just do not believe that the world is built for them to meet their own needs without it being selfish. Like there's this, you will be exposed as being a selfish, self-seeking type of person. You meet your own needs and someone else doesn't. And I was like, whoa. And it started kind of coming to a head for me. And that doesn't mean I like got out of any of the patterns right away, if at all. I mean, I stayed in a lot of my recurring patterns for a really, really long time because I was still lacking. You can have all of the knowledge in the world, but it's just trivia if you have no self-awareness, if you're not doing the work or whatever. So ultimately, I was in a really not so great work situation with, colleagues and up leads that, I couldn't communicate for myself, and some of them were not able to emotionally regulate. And, it just turned very, very sour. And I was like, okay, I can't let rock bottom teach me how to climb again. I need to figure out what's going on. So I really started doing the work into the Enneagram and my big, hairy, fat why, and was like, I'm just going to start with one lie at a time, and just started undoing. And where did I learn this for the first time? And what confirmed it? And what else confirmed it? And what else confirmed it? And what did I do about it? And how did I handle it? And what did I do to recover from the fact that I didn't handle it well? And what traps did I keep? And just one at a time. And it was a lot of work, but it was very, very well worth it. And I say this with full confidence. It's really, really nice to have gone from like a practicing user of the Enneagram to a life coach to a person who genuinely has no agenda and thrives off of seeing people go from here to there. And so that was, in a nutshell, it went from having absolutely no not a shred of self-awareness. Literally, I quite literally was under the impression other people can have boundaries, but I cannot. Other people can meet their own needs and take a day, but I cannot, to going to this completely different place where I'm like, oh, everything else just feels like a tip over the cup because I'm complete as is. So anyway, yes. Yeah. No agenda and feels good. That's my Enneagram story. What's yours?
Thank you for asking. I've had two very bright mystical experiences in my life, and one of them was around my Enneagram stuff. And I was on a podcast, which is hilarious to me. I really wanted to start something like a podcast. I never knew that that's what I wanted, but I had all the mics and all the things. And anyway, there was a guy who interviewed really big time folks, and I got on, and I had published 2 books in 2008, 2010. And I got to get on and talk, and I knew the conversation went kind of badly, but when he posted it and I listened to it, I could not handle how badly I thought I was coming across.
Wow.
And it was so bad that I was physically depressed as the episode went from my episode to the next episode. And he ends up being at this woman's house in the next episode and starts talking about something I would never have clicked on. And he says at one point, my wife's an Enneagram 1. And then the woman's voice, it's this Southern, older woman's voice. I kind of perk up and I was like, that's my grandmother. And this was my grandmother. And she started talking about Enneagram 1s. And my grandmother, who had died 20 years, well, it'd been 10 or so years earlier, started telling me who I was. And the woman was named Suzanne. And I'm listening to this episode of my grandmother telling me who I am. And it was the most surreal, especially the self-criticism that I was already bathed in, set the stage for it all.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what happened after I listened to the episode. I think it was just kind of it was just buzzed in my head and my heart. And at some point I went to the coffee shop and TJ was reading a book by somebody else, but it ended up being Suzanne's teacher. And somehow we connected then in a new way on this thing. That's my story.
That's wonderful. I've always struggled with this idea of being a 2 because I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not delicate. I'm not soft. I'm rarely sweet and rarely nice. Always kind, but it's just that's how I am. So, and I'm not saying any of those things about Suzanne, but what I'm saying is when I saw her speak with honey in her voice and conviction in her, I could see. I felt like, okay, if she's a 2, I could be a 2. I felt, I'll say it like this. Her being herself and just teaching told me that I could just be myself and that myself was a 2, but that I could be myself in that. And which has always made are you sure you're not an 8? Are you sure you're not a 6? Are you sure you're not a 4? Has always made that easier because I'm like, no, I'm a 2. I can be a 2. So I'm glad that I'm glad that what you feel didn't work out for you really worked out for you. And then in the next episode of, because that's how you found your end. Yeah.
I mean, the story gets worse as actually what happened. Like the 2016 was a train wreck of a year for me. So I stumbled into this thing that is about self-discovery, and then, and then I started having parents die and jobs fall apart. And like, I went through this stretch between 2016 and 2020 when my kid, and that was, that 4 years is just a nightmare. But this was the thing that kind of was just the thing that I needed through that season. So
no, for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I don't think that's been on the podcast for a long, long time. I think some of our early stuff we may have said something like that, but Jackie, it was a delight meeting you. I do hope we get to connect in the future. I'm really cheering for your work. And speaking of your work, not only where can people find you, but who are the people that you like working with most?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I basically live there. So I'm at Table for 9 Co. It's FOR and the digit 9, or tablefor9coaching.com, spelled the same way. Or JackieContessa.com if you feel like it. I work with lots and lots of people. I mostly work with women, some who know the Enneagram, some who don't. And essentially, it's people who want to identify these recurring patterns in their life and their assets and liabilities in those patterns. But the group that I love working with the most and empowering the most is single moms. And every time someone has a typing session with me, which is truly designed for the user, because I have a one-size-fits-all allergy, I gift one back to an eligible single mom, and that single mom will be in her first 2 years transitioning as a single mom, or starting a business, going back to school, mentoring other mothers, being in a helping position. And so I'm of the firm belief that everybody deserves a village. And if you know a single mom, of course you do. If you love a single mom, of course you do. You know that they're doing sometimes thrice the amount of work with no village. And we know that when they say it takes a village to raise a child, we don't account for the fact that some of that village belongs to mom too. So through my work, through my typing sessions, I partner with people to make sure we can give back those sessions to single moms. And so that's one of the things that I'm the most passionate about.
Absolutely love that.
I do as well. I was raised in part by a single mom for a long season. And I don't know how available your dad was, TJ, but I imagine you can affirm that mom did quite a bit.
Yeah. She was doing most of the legwork. Yeah.
There are also a lot of married single moms, and people don't realize that. And I like to work with them too. So if you feel in any way that you're eligible, please let me know.
It's a good line. Jackie Contessa, Table for 9. Do find her stuff. Speaking of stuff worth finding online, Jackie, do you know that we have a website? It's aroundthecircle.org.
I did.
It's incredible.
Tell me more.
Actually, you do, because I know that you're a member.
I do.
All sorts of fun stuff being released there. You listen to the full episode of this being released at aroundthecircle.org. You definitely should go. This was one of the best conversations we've had this year, so you only listened to half. As always, if you or somebody you love are looking to find their type, go to our Start Here podcast. You got anything else, TJ?
I just want to say this has been an absolute delight. I am a little upset that you live so far away from us, because I want to be friends with you so bad. Like, this has been such a fun, and like you talked, you mentioned earlier that like sexual subtypes kind of have a shorthand, like it's almost like you can immediately dive into, and I felt that way about talking to you from minute one, and I'm so excited to talk to you again. Let me say that.
Thank you so much. That is so kind. And I invite both of you guys to come have a Jersey bagel anytime that you want.
I heard from a woman I spoke to recently that they cause irritable bowel syndrome, so this apparently should be avoided. I think that this was a warning.
Sometimes we're allowed to have a permissible bagel once a month, and we pretend the gluten doesn't. Positive outlook, the gluten doesn't do for me as bad as the sadness without the bagel does.
It's a truth about life.
He's CJ Wilson. He's officially awesome. She's Jackie Contessa. You can find her at Table for Nine, and she's been a gift to us. And I'm Jeff Cook. And who you aren't just is not interesting.